The final paper I want to talk about today and for this block as a whole is a paper about advertising and word of mouth. So this is a bit different than what we were talking about in the previous papers, where it was digital ads and on demand, or digital ads thought of as tweets on demand. This is going to be more thinking about, do your ads, so just whatever advertising you might do as a company, does it translate into word of mouth? And I find this to be really interesting. And it's something that I personally think a lot about. So I thought I'd share it with you. And that kind of has a social media flavor because they think about ads and online word of mouth in the paper. So the motivation for this paper, when you read it, comes from some kind of notion that word of mouth, so consumer discussion about products, seems to reference ads or TV ads. And the paper puts out this statistic that says 20% of word of mouth references TV ads. So then what they really want to go after in this paper is trying to tease out any kind of actual effect, going to try and go after causality of advertising on word of mouth. They're going to think about online word of mouth, and they're also going to think about offline word of mouth, so just conversations between people, because they have access to some really cool data. And then they're going to think about whether that effect, they're going to think about that effect in kind of normal times, kind of aggregating across lots of different situations. And they're also going to focus on large events. They're going to focus on the Super Bowl and see if Super Bowl ads generate word of mouth. They're going to do all of this using observational data, so it's not going to be an experimental idea. They're not going to run an experiment or find a natural experiment. And they're just going to have really cool data on word of mouth. They're going to have relatively standard advertising data, and they're going to see what they can say. And hopefully be careful worrying about whether there's causality or not by putting in control variables to take away bad variation. So the data they're going to have access to, they're going to have 500 for their main question, not the Super Bowl question. They're going to have 536 brands over 16 product categories over a relatively long time horizon that I've forgotten right now, but I think it's like multiple years. And that's a lot of data. There's a lot of brands spanning lots of different product categories, which is really interesting. Do you get effects for different product categories or not over a relatively long time horizon? And they're going to have two pieces of information that are going to be important. It's going to be the ads. So like, do these things do something? How do we have ads? What they're going to have access to is monthly ad expenditure. So how much money you spent on advertising in a month from this ad spender database. So their X variable they're going to have is going to be something about ad spending. And then they're going to have word of mouth data. It's going to be offline and online word of mouth coming from two data sets that both don't seem to be totally around anymore. So the first is going to be this talk track data, which is going to be people surveyed who pay really close attention to the conversations they have about brands. And they're going to document that. From the paper says the Keller Fay Group. I tried to do some Googling to figure out, like, I hadn't heard of that company for a while. So I was like, okay, does that, could I still get that data? That now seems to be Engagement Labs and their data set Total Social. So it seems like this data is out there and it is interesting. And then they have access to Nielsen's user-generated content search engine, which wasn't very specific. So I went looking, and I think they're using Nielsen McKinsey's Insight data. And you can see how much online volume, Twitter, Facebook, like some kind of aggregate online mentions of your company. And what they're going to do is they're going to run a regression of log word of mouth from either one of these sources on some fixed effects to try and soak away some of the endogeneity and kind of omitted variable bias we might have. And then what they're interested in, beta 1, log TV advertising, and beta 2 being log internet advertising. So how does dollars spent on TV ads translate into word of mouth? How does ad spend on the internet translate into word of mouth? And this log-log specification means that beta 1 and beta 2 can be interpreted as elasticities. So a 1% change in X triggers a something percent change in word of mouth. They also add controls, so they add kind of lag word of mouth volume, so word of mouth in a previous month and 2 months ago, and some other control variables. Traditionally, when we think about adding lag Y, so word of mouth period before and period before in our model, it's normally cause to get nervous because it's suggestive there's going to be some kind of time series correlation and endogeneity brought about by that. But the paper tries to tell us, don't worry about it. We've got that under control, and we're going to take their word for it. So what results do they find when they run that regression? And what do we care about? So we're going to care about two things. We care about total word of mouth, and then what they're going to call online word of mouth. So total word of mouth comes from that Engagement Labs data set. And they find that if you look here, log TV ad dollars spent 0.019, which is like a 1% change in demand leads to a 0.02% increase in word of mouth. So 10% increase is a 0.2% increase in word of mouth. So that's a small number, but it's statistically significant. And the point of this paper really is statistically significant, but very small effects of advertising on word of mouth. They do the same thing for TV ads for internet advertising dollars and other advertising dollars. And these effects are all roughly the same. And then when they try and do the same thing for online word of mouth, they find effects that are smaller, essentially, over here. So still positive, still significant, just small. So there seems to be small effects of money spent on advertising on average on word of mouth. This is cool. But one thing that when I read this paper that I struggle with a little, I really like the paper. I work on a similar idea, but trying to figure out so it's the elasticity between dollars spent and volume of conversation. Is dollars spent the right metric? So could they have provided me with a number about the average TV ad costs so many dollars, so many tens of thousands of dollars? One TV ad leads to, right? I think that would be the kind of number that I'd be interested in, or a 10% increase in the amount of TV ads leads to, rather than a 10% increase in the amount of dollars spent. Because dollars spent don't necessarily buy you TV ads, right? Because it depends on the timing of the ad, the market you're in, what have you. So I find this to be something that if I was writing the paper, and I am writing a paper kind of in a similar idea, for me, the interesting quantity is the number of ads, or ideally the number of viewers, right? If I reach X million people with an ad, how does that translate into demand? Into word of mouth. This is going to be super hard for them and probably impossible because the ad spender data they have access to, I don't think gives them that data. But something that when you read this paper, the first thing that comes to my mind is dollars spent the right number to be thinking about? What else can we see from the paper? They also try and look at whether the effects are kind of heterogeneous. So they kind of they make all of the regression coefficients have different values. So they're kind of like random coefficients. There's a mean value, and then it's kind of dispersed. but that to me is not my favorite part of the heterogeneity story. What's more interesting is whether there's different effects across different categories. I'm going to focus on online because I think this is the better measurement. I think the offline measurement is a cool idea, but I don't totally capture it. I'm not totally sold on the idea. So let's focus on online word of mouth, kind of some of Twitter, Facebook, whatever, microblogs, other blogs, etc. More ad spend. What does it do to your word of mouth? Does it differ across categories? And you find that it does. For both TV and for internet ads. So what do we find? So these are our elasticities over here. And we see that TV and internet is going to be potentially different effects, and both between TV and internet, and they're going to be quite different across different product categories. So I think what might be interesting is that, say, entertainment products, so movies, TV, so on, there's effects of both TV ads that's statistically significant and internet ads. And the internet ad number seems to be bigger. So they seem to find an effect for both on word of mouth, but a larger effect for kind of entertainment ads served on the internet. I think that's interesting. I'm not totally sure what to make of it. And then for something like sports, ad spend on TV seems to give you a pretty good zero, but internet ads seem to give you a really large effect, a point estimate of 0.07, which is the largest by quite a bit. And then you find, for other products, the number seems to sit around 0. So travel goods don't seem to generate, their TV ads don't seem to generate a lot of online word of mouth, either internet-based or TV-based. Food seems to do something. Cars seems to give you zeros, and so on. That's interesting. There are effects, and they differ across product categories. And I think the product categories where the effects are largest kind of makes sense to me in a way. I really get, I get a sense that people talk about ads about entertainment products, so they're going to be there. People probably talk about sports, so sports ads are going to be picked up there. But then one thinks, well, is that really sports ads? Or is that just a sporting event thing kicking in here? I'm not totally sure. The fact that technology has no effect is a little surprising. Travel, for example, kind of expect that that's not going to have a huge effect. So there are effects, they differ across categories, and they differ hopefully in ways that are intuitive and kind of make sense when you see them. Then the last thing they do in the paper is go and look at the effect of Super Bowl ads. So Super Bowl ads are not like normal ads, it's the amount of viewership they get, right? And they try and look at the average treatment effect on the treated. So it's going to be a different empirical methodology for total word of mouth and online word of mouth of the Super Bowl ad. And they find things like word of mouth on a representative sample increases by something like, what's this number? 10.8%, right? So your ad increases, if you put an ad in the Super Bowl on average for a month, you get a 10.8% increase in the amount of word of mouth, online and offline. If you just measure online, at a month level, you get this guy, and it's about 15%. So you find that the effects seem to be larger online than offline. So large events, your ads might get you a larger effect. But remember, maybe don't remember, but maybe consider that the kind of ads firms place during these large events like the Super Bowl, Olympics, maybe Champions League in Europe, are not necessarily the standard ads that these companies are running all day, or all day, every day. There might be special ads designed to run just at the Super Bowl. So these are special ads potentially running at special times. And you seem to get an effect. Super interesting that, okay, it is these ads generating larger effects, but they're also special ads generally. They're not like the ad that you see at 8 p.m. on a Wednesday night watching CBS, so on. So what's the takeaway from this? If we get rid of those little pen drawings, small positive, statistically significant effect of advertising spend on word of mouth. So there does seem to be a relationship. TV ads can get you earned media, so word of mouth. And that question I had at the beginning, so I find this to be really interesting actually. But is ad spend the right way to sell the paper? I'm not so sure. I think about, one ad gets you, and they kind of do that when they go back to the Super Bowl, because one ad and it's kind of special. But it'd be nice to see that for the entire paper. Heterogeneity across categories. So they find that there's larger effects of ad spend on word of mouth for sports, hobbies, media, entertainment, not for telecom. I think I put that in incorrectly. And then that for large events, so things like the Super Bowl, there are larger effects of advertising on word of mouth. They show that there's like this 10% increase, but the effects are short-lived, so they last, I think, for a maximum of 1 month. And I think there's a caveat in the background that these are special ads generally, at least for the Super Bowl. These are not your standard ad generating that online word of mouth or total word of mouth.